Fired FBI Director James Comey. Last night, the unemployed, hyper-partisan former bureaucrat made yet another appearance on CNN, where he continued to impugn the character of the president and float baseless conspiracy theories about Trump and Russia. Watch this.
Do you think the Russians have leverage over President Trump?
I don't know the answer to that.
Think it's possible?
Yes. I think the Trump presidency risks sending a message that leadership doesn't have to have a moral component, that it's not important in this country for a leader to have external ethical reference points.
Explain how you believe the President of the United States is eating people's souls and how that process takes place.
Yeah, and it doesn't make me happy to write that, but it's what I believe.
Comey is now all but rooting for President Trump to be impeached and locked up for phantom obstruction of justice charges. But in reality, it's Comey who could be in serious legal jeopardy. After all, it was Comey who leaked sensitive government documents after he was fired. It was Comey who first signed off on the Carter Page FISA application based on the dirty dossier. And it was Comey who was the very center of the deep state's coordinated effort to spy on the Trump campaign. But according to Mr. Comey, using undercover informants to secretly spy on campaign officials in the height of an election is totally normal. Take a look.
Sending an investigator undercover to meet with somebody who is connected to the campaign, they claimed he was later on just a coffee boy, that is an extreme step, no?
No, it's a reasonable... That was the guy, Papadopoulos, who was the subject of the information we got from the Australians, that he had talked to the Russians.
Did you sign off on the investigator going?
I don't remember talking about that particular step with my team. I knew they were trying to see if they could check it out. That's a totally normal step.
No, it's not. Comey wants you to believe that the American government spying on its own citizens during a presidential election, totally normal and reasonable. According to the holier-than-thou Comey, he can do no wrong. Instead, Comey believes that anybody who works with or supports the president is a morally weak degenerate. Watch.
I think people like that, like Rod Rosenstein, who are people of accomplishment, but not real sterling character, strong character, find themselves trapped. And then they start telling themselves a story to justify their being trapped, which is, yeah, he's awful, but the country needs me. The Republicans are doing this in Congress now. Yeah, it's awful, but if I speak, I'll get defeated. And this nation needs me here right now. And in the process, he has eaten their soul. They're lost.
So Rod Rosenstein, you're saying, is a person not of a strong character?
Yeah, I don't think he is. Of accomplishment, very bright, but he's not strong enough.
Seems awfully distressed for someone who claims to have done nothing wrong. Joining us now is Fox News contributor, former state and federal prosecutor, and former Congressman Trey Gowdy. I had the pleasure of serving with Mr. Gowdy in the Congress. So Trey, thank you so much for being here. Mr. Comey had another town hall. I think he had more town halls than you did as a member of Congress for 8 years. You know, I got a problem when you have like Comey and Clapper and Brennan. They're all out there having these town halls. They had the mantle of, you know, doing intelligence type of work, and then they go out and talk to the American people as if they know something that the rest of us don't know. But what was your take on the latest comments from Mr. Comey?
St. James Comey, pretty much the same as every other interview. He's always right. He gets to write the moral script. If you deviate from that, if you're Rod Rosenstein, then you lack character. If you're somebody else, your soul's been eaten. What I kept thinking back to, Jason, was when I asked Jim Comey, how did the Russia investigation get started? Who started it? He didn't know it was Peter Strzok. He never read the initiation document. Look, you and I served together a long time. I defend law enforcement just as vigorously as any member of Congress ever has, but that does not mean that there are not opportunities for oversight. Comey refuses to believe that any of these decisions should be looked at. So he's always right. Everybody else is wrong. And he and Clapper and Brennan are validating the concerns that other people, including the president, have had about their objectivity by their comments and their demeanor after they left their offices.
Now, Director Comey is saying that as regards to spying, he doesn't like the word spying, but that's essentially what it is. He said it's totally normal to inject somebody into a political campaign and to go and investigate what's going on there. And he said it was reasonable to do so. What's your take on that?
Well, I use the word surveillance. I think they're synonyms, and law enforcement does do surveillance, but you have to do it legally. You have to do it according to policy, and most importantly, there has to be a factual predicate. So I am sure that crackerjack reporter who hosted the town hall asked Jim Comey with specificity what was the factual predicate. If the FBI ran an informant in on George Papadopoulos, what was the factual predicate for doing so? Did the FBI also provide the factual predicate that they then tried to extract back from George Papadopoulos? And how in the world did someone with a historical level of animus like Peter Strzok, how in the world did you ever pick him to lead an investigation into someone he thought would be destabilizing for the Republic? This is what you need to remember about Jim Comey, Jason. This is all you got to remember. If Rod Rosenstein had not fired him, he would still be the FBI director. The guy who talks about souls being eaten and the guy who says everybody else lacks character, he'd still be on an Air Force jet, sipping wine, crossing the country, had he not been fired. So this paragon of virtue, Jim Comey, self-described paragon of virtue, would still be the FBI director, still working for an administration that he thinks is too good for impeachment, had he not been fired.
But Rod Rosenstein, Director Comey made a real snarky comment about Rod Rosenstein as he's going out the door. I've been highly critical of Rod Rosenstein along the way. I thought he had a lot of conflicts of interest and other questions that I've had. But at the same time, for Director Comey to make those kind of comments as his last day is leaving, I thought that was just wrong.
He's always right, Jason. He's always right. He's authored the script of what is right and wrong. There are plenty of days I disagree with Rod. I never called for his impeachment, just like I never called for John Koskinen's impeachment. Rod had a really tough job, and I appreciate his service to the country, even on the days where I disagree with him. But to take a shot at somebody the week they leave public service, and to do it with the moral arrogance that Jim Comey does almost everything is one reason he's not very popular right now.
Well, Director Comey, it was actually 2 years ago was the day that he was fired, and I do think that was the right thing. And the Democrats conveniently forget how much they wanted to see him fired by the way he treated Clinton along the way. But I got to ask you, Director Comey,
You mean those who didn't want him, like, criminally prosecuted?
Right.
Remember, Harry Reid thought he committed a criminal violation, then they wanted him fired, and now they want him canonized or put on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Now Director Comey is actually saying that he thinks that Donald Trump in the Trump family should actually still be indicted down the road. What did you take when you heard those comments?
Just how disappointed I am in any federal prosecutor, former federal prosecutor, assigning a presumption of guilt to anyone. You know, the president is not above the law. I heard Comey say that, but he's also not below the law. He also is not unentitled to a presumption of innocence. He is also not unentitled to people following the rules and the policies when they invest. Just because you're the president, just because you're powerful, doesn't mean you get to treat people however you want to treat them. If there's a factual predicate for investigating anyone with the Trump campaign, 2 points, Jason. Number one, tell us what it is. And number two, acknowledge that Donald Trump himself told you, Director Comey, if anyone with my campaign was involved in Russia, I want you to investigate it. I want you to find out. That is not what a guilty person says.
No, it's exactly right. And the fundamental problem I have is when somebody becomes the nominee for the presidency of the United States, we give them Secret Service protection, we give them CIA briefings. And if there was somewhere, somehow, that was maybe a problem in the campaign, they had a duty and an obligation to tell that nominee that you may have somebody who might be a mole in that, and not just use that as some excuse. But it started way before then, and that's why this Michael Horowitz report is so important. I got to ask you two other quick questions, and we only have a minute or so. Real quickly, yes, the national media, you dealt with them, I dealt with them, but the way they're portraying this story and they're rolling it out, is that fair and balanced? Is that the way it always goes down?
Jason, you and I have discussed before, the biggest disappointment of my 8 years in Congress is how biased the D.C. media is, whether it's the Post, the Times, Politico, the Hill. They never met a Republican investigation that should have ever started, and they never met a Democrat investigation that should ever end. The way they viewed the Holder contempt versus the Barr contempt, the way they view Donald Trump talking about investigation with Obama. Remember, he pre-cleared the IRS. There was absolutely not a smidgen of corruption. He pre-cleared Hillary Clinton. There's just a double standard. So I realize Congress isn't popular, but neither is the media, and they may want to try to figure out why that is.
And last thing I got to ask you about is Jerry Nadler holding contempt, on our Attorney General. I got to tell you, that did not sit well from my perspective, but what was your take?
Only that there must be two Jerry Nadlers, because the old Jerry Nadler opposed contempt on Eric Holder. Remember, he walked out of the House because he was in such violent protest of the fact that Attorney General Holder would not produce documents. And then the duplicity of thinking the Starr report should be treated one way, but the Mueller report should be treated another. Again, when Republicans engage in duplicity, we ought to be called out for it. They should. Yeah. But so should the Democrats, and the D.C. media just never does it.
No, there's such an imbalance there, but it was an honor and privilege to serve at the end of Congress, and so I appreciate you coming with us on this beautiful Friday night on Hannity tonight. Congressman Gowdy, thank you. With the Inspector General's investigation into FISA abuse ongoing, tonight we're learning new details about Comey's former top lawyer, James Baker. Joining us now with more is Catherine Herridge. Catherine.
Congressman, while the National Security Court was not explicitly told of the DNC and Clinton campaign connections to the anti-Trump dossier, today the FBI's former top lawyer said the Bureau provided the court with sufficient warning.
My assessment was that the information set forth in that gigantic footnote was consistent with the type of information and the way we would phrase things to basically effectively be the red light on top of the document.
And now another challenge to the warrant's integrity. Citing newly released records, 3 Senate Republicans now question whether a senior State Department official warned the FBI before the FISA warrant application about the anti-Trump dossier's author, former British spy Christopher Steele, and his apparent political motivation. Senators Johnson, Grassley, and Graham write the State Department official Kathleen Kavalek's notes show the opposition research firm Fusion GPS, led by Glenn Simpson and Peter Fritsch, were deeply involved. Steele and possibly others were, quote, keen to see this information come to light before the election. On October 13, 2016, just 3 weeks before the election, Kavalek sent this email, but the publicly released version has redacted the attachment, the subject, as well as the recipient. Congressman?
Catherine, thank you. This program has long sounded the alarm about FISA abuse. And this morning, the ranking member of the House Intel Committee had this to say about James Comey's potential illicit behavior. Take a look.
There's no question as it relates to the FISA on Carter Page that nothing was done by the book. In fact, it was all very irregular, in fact. So this is the whole idea that you could take Clinton campaign dirt and use it. To remember when he came before our task force at the end of the last Congress, this is a man who couldn't answer a question. I think, over 100 times he said things like, I don't recall. So whenever put under oath, on a body like the legislative body of Congress, the guy couldn't answer a question. He can do a town hall and make a lot of things up. But I think Mr. Comey's in a lot of trouble, and he should be. He made a mess of the FBI.
I think he's right. Joining us now is Fox News contributor Sarah Carter, the author of License to Lie, Exposing Corruption in the Department of Justice, Sidney Powell, and Ohio Congressman